Welcome to Up Close, Meet Your Poet Behind the Verse. I am your host, River Maria Urke, and with me tonight is Sarah Deckner-Riveros, filling in for Julie Martin. This is our 21st show, and it is our third year interviewing poets. This year we have moved to be a seasonal production or show. I mean, I'm fumbling. Isn't that funny? But we have the same goal, and that's to introduce to you the people behind the poems. So I'd like to remind our Zoom audience to remain muted during the duration of the show. So if everyone make sure that you're muted. Right, we will have a giveaway today, details later. A shout out to our sponsors, the League of Minnesota Poets. And I'll remind us all we're being recorded for a future video to be on our YouTube channel. So with that, sit back and I'll introduce to you our first up close poet of 2023, Rick Hilber. Do you want to do the next one? Sarah? Richard John Hilber is a teacher, poet, bus driver, lawyer, grandfather, and a man of deep faith. He was born in Lemoore, North Dakota in 1950. In his own words, he is the seventh of his mother's 12 children. Rick had 7 sisters and 4 brothers, and was the youngest boy of 5. He jokes with all his older brothers, he was left alone. Primarily, Rick was raised in Fargo, North Dakota until high school, when he moved to Chesterfield, Missouri, to attend a seminary boarding school. He graduated in 1968 and then went to Moorhead State College. Rick earned a high school English teaching degree in 1972. The next year he married his wife Jean and started law school, but then they were expecting their first child. So his career as an English teacher began and lasted for 20 years. They had 2 daughters and were married for 15 years. Rick moved into the Twin Cities to teach in '86. And in '93, he went back to law school, graduating in '96. From then to '98, Rick volunteered his service to be a guardian ad litem for children protection of Hennepin County. He dabbled with different jobs as a lawyer until he let his state license slip in 2010. Throughout his adult life, Rick wrote poetry privately till 2015 when he appeared in the poetry scene. That same year, he published his first book, Down the Highway, a piece from Friesen Press. In 2016, he published his second book, In Pieces in the Plaza. When Rick gets the chance, he loves to work with wood to create functional items. He is a grandfather of 6. 4 are in the state, and they're all granddaughters, and 2 grandsons are in Oregon. Currently, Rick is working as a bus driver, posting his poetry on Facebook, and administrating Bird's Nest reading series, Open Mic plus Black Coffee Poets. Let us welcome Rick Hilber.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick.
Yeah, thank you for the welcome.
So here, our first question is, you grew up in Fargo, North Dakota, a large, very large Catholic family. Upon reflection of your beginning years, is there a story that stands out of you as the person you became? Like a story that says, Rick?
I probably have a number of anecdotes that I definitely like to tell, but I guess one of the ones that seems most graphic in my imagination, I was a newspaper delivery person. So after school, I would go to pick up my paper papers at Claire Barton backstop. When Claire Barton was a public school, and there was a backstop where my papers were thrown off the truck. And I also did Saturdays and Sundays in the morning. So one Sunday morning, I go out to my stop, and there are going to be bundles, not just one bundle of newspapers, because the Sunday form in those years was rather thick for all the advertisements. And the bundles were warm when they were thrown off the truck. And when I got there, there were two other carriers who hadn't shown up yet. And I was there by myself for quite some time. And it was probably 28 below. Ugh. And there was an animal on my bundles. And why the dog had to be on my bundles, I don't know. It could have gone on the other bundles as far as I'm concerned. But I looked at this animal, and every time I got near it to stroke it or to, basically be kind to it, it basically showed its fangs. And I realized that I was dealing with what must have been a wild animal who did not want to be encouraged to get off of my bundles so I could start my paper out. And I think I probably was all of 8 or 9 years old. So it was a little bit traumatic, because I went to the first house and the second house and the third house, knocking on the door, ringing doorbells. And I don't think anybody was awake to answer, but eventually somebody did open the door, and I asked to use their phone. And I called the forum in downtown Fargo, and I said, I seem to have an animal, a dog, maybe a wolf, I don't know, but it doesn't get off my bundles. And they said, well, it's your problem, kid. Take care of it. Which, those things where you kind of, what's supposed to happen next. But I do remember going back, and for some reason the animal was more trusting of me at that point. And eventually the animal wandered off. Maybe what had actually happened is the bundles had gotten cold, because I was late on the route that morning, I'll tell you that. But I wasn't the latest one because I was the first one to the corner. But the other carriers got there after I had left, as near as I can tell. So.
Well, that's funny.
Yeah.
That's funny. And everybody's trying to stay warm in that kind of cold.
Yeah, 28 below. And
I know that kind of cold. That's yeah. So you left North Dakota to attend a seminary high school in Missouri, a Catholic boarding school. What were your initial plans?
Well, I was raised by a very devout mother. She was actually an ecumenical Catholic, which means she was deeply respectful of the faith that other people adhered to. But she was an adherent of Catholicism and very devout. And I served Mass, which was something that young boys did in those years. Nowadays, young girls might be asked to serve Mass too. So it's not gender specific, and shouldn't be. But I basically prayed the Mass, and I prayed the Rosary, and I was a very devout little Catholic. And my parents pretty much let people know they would appreciate to have a vocation to the priesthood, or maybe one of their daughters would become a nun. And I suspect to get attention, I probably said, well, I'll be a priest, and then the same thing happened in the Catholic elementary school. Who's going to be a priest? Raise your hand if you're going to be a priest. So I would raise my hand, that kind of thing. But the Maryknoll Fathers are actually the Catholic Foreign Mission Society, and there are Maryknoll Sisters as well. But they're actually a pretty decent bunch of people who spent a lot of years in the missions, and most of them got terribly sick living overseas. But they would learn the language of the people. They would help with skills, electricity, digging wells, getting clean water, helping with schools. So that was the kind of person that I thought maybe I could be a priest.
We wanted, yeah, totally. And then something happened.
Well, actually, when I think about it, as we were talking before, when I left at the end of my senior year, knowing I was not going to go on to what was called major seminary, which is the college level, part of it is that I knew I wasn't going to take a vow of celibacy. I was already so interested in the other gender that I thought, this is trouble.
Yeah.
Why would you take a vow of celibacy and then not be able to live by it? I think a little differently about it today than I would have in those years. The big thing about it, of course, is my father. I wrote him letters my junior year. I said I'm not going on to major seminary, and I don't know if he actually even read those letters. My mother may have shunted them aside for all I know, because I ended up with the letters because my mother made sure I got the letters after she died. A bundle of letters came to me, and there were letters I'd written to my dad. But when he found out at my high school graduation trip home from Chesterfield, Missouri, that I wasn't going to major seminary, his demeanor changed. He was not very happy with me. He basically had funded my boarding school experience and my studies for the foreign missions. So he was kind of disappointed, and our relationship was never really right until about the age of 43.
Wow.
It was basically off.
But you did find a love for literature in high school. Was
Yeah.
there something in particular that sparked that?
Well, it's interesting as I go back over those years. I did mention to you Father John Sheridan, and if I may, I'll finish answering your question by talking about John Sheridan a little bit. What I realized is I'd fallen into reading literature and fiction. And the first author I want to mention is James Michener and his rather thick books. I think the word tome, Tome, is a good word for his books. They're usually like this thick. Hawaii is the one I first read. And I've read Mexico, and typically he would basically do the homework on a culture and on a people. And the priest at the seminary noticed that I was reading Michener, and they said, "Can't you find anything sacred to read?" But it was like I persisted because I was getting a view of the world at large, and I really wanted to know the world at large, and that was a chance for me to see it through the lens of a novelist, James Michener. And his Iberia is absolutely stunning. If you ever read one of his books, I would read Iberia. Just the history of the gorgeous Spanish heritage and custom, and the various people from the Catalans to the Moors. Just such a rich, interesting tapestry of history. But I also moved on. In class, I would have been assigned to read Herman Melville, Moby Dick. I loved it. I would have read things like The Scarlet Letter, which was a real eye-opener for me personally, that the price to be paid for falling in love with the wrong person can be, exacted from you. It turned out to be a pretty interesting book for me to have read as a teenager, because it definitely informed my life going forward. I also read a Spanish novelist. I don't want to pronounce his name because I'll probably mispronounce it, but he wrote a famous book, the first book, I guess, of some notoriety, and it was called The Cypresses Believe in God. It was about the Spanish Civil War, and it really, really opened my eyes to the strata of society and ethnicity and language challenges. And this novelist himself fought with the nationalists, and that's a polite way of saying fascist. But he is such a good novelist that I never once understood what his political disposition was. He actually was a humanist, and I love that book. And he wrote another thick book that follows it called 1 Million Dead, 1 Million Dead, and I read that. So I was a reader in high school, but John Sheridan kind of threw me a pitch. He was my senior teacher, and I considered him a fairly young priest. Unlike the other priests that were my teachers who had gone to the missions and got desperately ill, I think he was waiting to be sent overseas. But he was from New York City, and he loved the New Yorker magazine, and he assigned his senior students a task of writing an essay or a story or a poem based on a New Yorker cover. And I think the New Yorker cover I picked probably was Coney Island, like a beach scene. And I wrote this poem, and when he talked to me about it, he says, "I have no idea what you're up to in this thing that you handed in," you know. But he actually talked to me about it and what I was trying to accomplish, and it was called an innocent, a song of innocence from a breakout, or a breakout from a song of innocence, or something like that. It was one of those titles like you don't have any business writing if you can't come up with a better title. Mm-hmm. But it got me going. It kind of got me thinking about why I loved imagery so much, or why I was fascinated by imagery. And it's not like the poem was deeply narrative in any successful sense. So I kind of understood later maybe why John Sheridan had a little bit of trouble with it. But it did get me thinking. And when I went to college, I wanted to be an English major, but my language skills were highly deficient. Morehead State, which is next door to Fargo, if you know the border country up there, the Red River Valley, they were not going to admit me because my ACT English score was too low. And I basically had to appeal that. And I became an English major, and I stayed with it all the way through college. And I don't think my language skills were there yet. They would be there eventually. But I had struggled in grade school. I probably was one of the last kids to ever read. I had a stutter. I was very slow starting in school. And for me to have prevailed as an English major and ultimately an high school English teacher, and then to have made it through law school where they teach you to write.
You're giving away too much.
Yeah. You get me talking.
Okay, so we are going to go jump back, and I'm going to ask you, it's time to hear a poem. Do you have a favorite poem for us?
I do. And I assume you mean by somebody else. And this poem was read by me when I was in college, and it has stayed with me ever since. So I'm just going to bring it up here. It's called On the Move by Tom Gunn. And you can find it if you want to look for it on the internet very easily. The Poetry Foundation has an excellent rendition up that you can read. I'll just go through it here. It's pretty well known to me. The blue jay scuffling in the bushes follows some hidden purpose, and the gust of birds that spurts across the field, the wheeling swallows, has nested in the trees and undergrowth, seeking their instinct or their poise or both. One moves with an uncertain violence under the dust thrown by a baffled sense with a dull thunder of approximate words. On motorcycles up the road they come, small, black as flies, hanging in the heat, the boys, until the distance throws them forth. Their hum bulges to thunder, held by calf and thigh, in goggles, donned in personality, in gleaming jackets, trophied with the dust. They strap in doubt by hiding it robust, and almost hear a meaning in their noise. Exact conclusion of their hardiness has no shape yet, but from known whereabouts they ride, direction where the tires press. They scare a flight of birds across the field. Much that is natural to the will must yield. Men manufacture both machine and soul, and use what they imperfectly control to dare a future from the taken routes. It is a part solution after all. One is not necessarily discord on earth or damned because half animal. One lacks direct instinct because one wakes afloat on movement that divides and breaks. One joins the movement in a valueless world, choosing it till both hurler and the hurled. One moves as well, always toward. A minute holds them who have come to go, the self-defined, astride the created will, they burst away. The towns they travel through are home for neither bird nor holiness, for birds and saints complete their purposes. At worst, one is in motion, and at best, reaching no absolute in which to rest. One is always nearer by keeping still.
Who's the author again?
Tom Gunn. It's a double N on the end. So Tom is Thom, and then Gunn is Gunn. He's a well-known British poet of his era. I wouldn't be surprised many English majors have never heard of him, but he is anthologized. And I, at the time I found this poem, didn't know who he was. What I liked about his poem was basically explaining to me, who was a fairly cloistered person, who these motorcycle gang people actually were. They were just people, lost souls in many cases, misdirected in many cases, but also a fairly romanticized group of people. If you think about culture in this country, motorcycle gangs have been romanticized, and Easy Rider, for example, is about the loner, and the loner in his interactions with small towns and backward places.
Some of the nicest people I've ever met were motorcycle.
Well, there you go. There you go.
Totally. Let's see. So in 1972, you earned a degree teaching English high school and spent the next 20 years teaching teenagers literature. You lived the family life while your two daughters were raised. And during all these years, you wrote poetry, but kept it to yourself. Can you explain to us your life as a poet and how you held the pages of your own keeping?
Yeah, the way I explained my having been a closet poet is essentially that I didn't expect notoriety. I didn't expect to be published. I didn't really have any expectation. What I knew was a number of poets at Morehead State, and I had a Professor Thomas McGrath, who it was then known to me how important he was nationally, but he was their poet in residence, and I had him for creative writing. But there were a number of students that were working on what was called the Dakota Territory publication. And I knew these people and I went to their readings, but I had no confidence whatsoever. I would not have held myself out as a poet as a college student. And with my high school students, I basically would be in high school surroundings and high school settings where no one read poetry or had an interest in poetry among my peers as teachers. Essentially, my wife was a very avid reader, but not of poetry. So it wasn't like she was encouraging me to write poetry. But I wrote poetry on the slide, and I collected it, and I rewrote it, and I did many, many things, as I went along. But I didn't really have the spirit in the sense of wanting to be known publicly as a poet. I remember reading a poem to a high school student and then feeling deeply embarrassed that I had done it. It was like I had no business doing it.
You read one of your own poems, you mean?
Yeah, it was one of those things like I didn't know there was a boundary there. And once I had done it, I said, I'll never do it again. You need a very profound and deep respect for your students. It's about their success. And you wanted for a little bit of recognition for yourself. You really needed to go to your to fellow English teachers or
Yeah.
whatever. But you live and learn, and that's how I became a good English teacher, was by doing it.
Well, you did bring pile your poems together. And in
Yeah.
2015, you published your first book, Down the Highway, a Piece.
Yes.
Can you read a poem for us?
Sure.
We
And
can hear one of your poems.
yeah, I had such a wonderful time putting this book together. I still love to talk about the fact that the poems had to talk to each other, and there were poems that had to make changes to belong in the collection. And there were gaps where I had to write new poetry. And that process was just enthralling. I absolutely loved it. But I'll go ahead and read one. This is a little bit autobiographical. I don't know if anyone knows what a stymie is, but in the game of golf, some people do some perverse things on putting greens so that the other person can't really go for the hole. And you don't always see that. The rules have kind of changed about marking your ball and maybe even moving your markers so that the person can have a shot at putting their ball in the hole. But I use the word stymie not because this is a golfing poem, but I call it Father Eastman's stymie. And it has to do with baptism and child baptism. And I'll just go ahead and read it. What does one say about being? Is it restricted to mere existence? An existence that science can analyze, like microbes under the microscope? What if God is also not in being, but creator of being? What if then God provided and chooses to enter into being? Could he be born to us family? Or be put to death for his ethnicity or his gender? Where would this child find comfort when he was wet, hungry, and cold, or wanted simply to be held? One just cannot say. Sure, it's no small wonder this here woman cradles yet again a child, but it's just an everyday event, one which no one calls Christmas. She says to me, my child's baptism will wait until it's ordained. 30 years or never, if it's meant to be. The good Lord had it no better. So that's a fairly typical poem in the first section of the book.
Cool. Well, and you're going to give one of these books away, plus another, your other one. Do you have that's that one. So that's our clue that all of you on Zoom, we are having a giveaway. 2 books are going to be given away. So you, in the chat, you have one guess between 1 to 50. Whoever comes the closest to a number without going over a win, and will be announced at the end. So throw your numbers out.
Cool.
So then it's 2016. So even though you didn't you wrote and wrote and wrote, you compiled 2 books in 2 years. So in 2016, you published your second book, Pieces in the Plaza. What does this book entail? And can we hear a poem from here, from this one?
Sure. Now this collection of poems basically starts with the turn of the century and goes up to 2016. And in 2014, I think is the earliest I went to Barbaric Yop, which was an open mic in Falcon Heights held at the Underground Music Cafe. And I started going to other events. And so what I was actually doing was holding myself out in public as a poet. And then that led to my investing in publication of what I would call legacy publications. I didn't really know anybody would want my book who would ever buy it. So I was willing to invest in the project of producing a book. And I have no regrets about it in either case. But I'll read a poem from this one. This one is about my second wife. I married in 2001. It's called It Took How Long? Somewhere far north of the Caucasus, a housewife with curtains yanked hard open welcomes a Baltic breeze. The cat's paw, it's called, like one I waked to this morning in Minnesota. It took how long, I thought, to traverse what mountain updraft over what shallow, tumultuous sea, crossing just to claim her homestead. Lying abed in the previous day's swelter, I was startled by clawing over my nude body as if it were inconvenient to cool me down through this window above my head. I hear my wife cooing as it paws, caress from verdant steppes, and then a tundra of ice and snow with a skelter of weather is helter and possessed. So, through the screened aperture, it boldly alighted on her blonde skin, which must have known it was wanted where it belonged on her lower slopes. I did feel its cool of night into morning air, but not as lost kin, dew, or what her zephyr must have felt alighting on her valleys, as off of a snowfield of Mount Ararat. That one's called It Took How Long? Her people were from the Baltic states, from Lithuania. And I think the notion of a wind traversing the globe to find her and to cool her in the swelter is what stirred me to write that poem. And it's meant to be a love poem. I don't think anyone necessarily sees it as a love poem, but it was kind of like an admiration for the beauty of the moment, the open window, the spouse resting next to me, cooing. She was obviously being comforted by that breeze. You know, we didn't, neither one of us believe in air conditioning. So that cooling breeze on a summer day, the picture of it coming, you know, over the Atlantic Ocean, for example, over the Baltic, you know, across the mountain range to get here. There's something to me, I'd like to know exactly how it came into my head, but it came to me in the middle of the night that I was experiencing her beauty. And in terms of what I was watching and hearing and experiencing.
Sounds to me like very romantic relationship.
Well, you know, it's interesting. This is personal, obviously, but I don't see myself as marriage material. I've lived a life thinking I was a married person. I think my single state has been excellent for me in terms of taking care of myself and honoring the gift of life that's been given to me. I think I can be a generous person, more generous person as a single person but you know, each to their own. I'm not saying it had to end up the way it ended up. It just, you know, that's my personal reality, the way I look at myself.
Well, you know, we have times of people come in and out of our lives. They have certain times, you know, and we have experiences, and yeah, it's there's that. So you spoke about your work understanding emotions as a man. Yes. And how that differs from the society's expectations of boyhood. How much of your understanding of emotions today is linked to your passion to write poetry?
I wrote poetry to figure out what I was feeling. I really think that was my motivation. If you asked me what I was feeling, I would say fine. You know, Nowadays, if you ask me how I was feeling, I'd probably say something like, mind your own business. I mean, kind of crotchety, whatever. But I think if a man is schooled in anger, and anger is bad, anger is a mask of a lot of emotions. So one of the first lessons I had to learn is that if somebody regards anger as as evil, but doesn't concern himself or herself with what's behind that anger, why do you feel the way that you're feeling? That kind of trust, that kind of requirement is of an intimate relationship. So I think I've been schooled by people who actually I ended up trusting, who asked me questions like, what's that about? Why are you feeling angry? The mask of the emotions sometimes means that you're not really going to own them. There's not going to be any accountability. The first emotion that I felt as a college student was jealousy. And I was scared. I'm going to use an epithet if I'm not careful. I was scared. Epithet. I really was scared by jealousy. I think the fact that I was so deeply and profoundly in love with this person, and then to essentially have her move on with her life, it was debilitating. But I also thought, what is the price of falling in love going in? It's the price of coming out of that love. And when you're young and the hormones are hopping, a lot of this is a little terrifying for men, but men are supposedly easier to move on to the next person. And women sometimes feel, like maybe they've been damaged or injured by somebody loving them and leaving them. But that's a human condition, folks. I don't need to preach that sermon, but I needed to understand that I was just as vulnerable as the next person when it came to falling in love. And I wouldn't admit that I'd fallen out of love with her probably for 25, 30 years. You want to hold on to it. It was so special. It was so wonderful. You think it's everything, but
Yeah.
it's not. It's not everything.
No.
But
No, things can be mighty different 10 years, 20 years down the road. You can think something one way, and then it's completely different you later on.
Well, I just wanted to say though at this point that in life, what you think you have to have isn't near as good as what you actually have. It's kind of like in life, if you learn to live with gratitude, you have actually covered some turf in your life. If you understand what you have had and the people you have had in your life, I've had some wonderful people in my life, and they have more to do they explain more about me than I think I personally can explain about myself.
Oh yeah.
So if you've been loved and be a loving person, that's not a bad formula. That's good to know.
Totally. Well, you mentioned it, but you came out of the closet in 2015 and started going to Barbaric Yelp, and soon after Poets with Pints. What attracted you to these venues? And there's venues all over the city. These particular venues, what attracted you to them?
Well, every art and craft has gatekeepers. And I think I was daunted by that. It was like, I'll never be good enough. I'll never have the favor of these people. What's the point? So I had a chip on my shoulder. It went way back into my elementary school years that everything was going to be hard. Don't expect anybody to encourage you, kind of thing. I basically had nurtured myself as a poet. And what this was about was coming of age at the age of, good grief, 65, being willing to take criticism. Well, I'd been to law school. I'd written for judges. And I understood more about my vulnerabilities as a writer than because of law school than I ever would have as an English teacher, because being an English teacher was about helping my students. It wasn't about helping myself. But boy, once I had to write professionally for judges, I could tear my poetry apart and put it back together again and know why it ended up the way it ended up. It was a completely different feeling about poetry. So I really was fearless in 2015. I was done with the law career. When I went to Barbaric Yop, when I went to Coffee Shop in Northeast, when I went, I don't know if Poets and Pints was going on at that point. There were other events I would go to, but what I liked was open mic, and I've really been an open mic poet ever since. If I'm going to wait for somebody to invite me to do a show with them or, be on a bill, it has happened, but I don't live my life thinking about, the next time somebody's going to give me a chance to be on the bill. What I think about is living in community with other poets. If we are
So
listening,
what attracted you the most to those is the open mic aspect, or is there certain people?
absolutely. River, you're one of them.
Oh.
Chris Idle, you'd walk in, you'd have to walk over and introduce yourself to him, and he might say something or he might not. He might say, "Are you here to read today?" And sure, well, I'll put your name on the list. You might get a turn today. Hang around. So it was just the fact that, the gatekeeper was actually there to moderate the performances, to make sure they didn't go over their 3 minutes or their 5 minutes or whatever, and that people were respectful of one another. And that, like I said, for a community of poets to be audience to one another, to have somebody listen to your poem and for you to listen honestly to the poem of another person, this is community building. This is culture building. This is This is not watching TV, folks. This is far, far better than watching TV or going to the movie theater. This is wonderful stuff. I love it. And I am passionate about it. My friend George Colburn, who's on the screen with us, you meet a fellow traveler, and if they lock him up, they're going to have to lock me up. Probably the same insane asylum, for the old days. But
well, I just noticed the time, Rick, and we're running out of time.
Yeah, well, you didn't know you were doing a talker, did you?
Oh, I know, I did, but I'm gonna look at these questions and see.
Yeah, good for you.
Okay, I'm gonna say I have to say this. Since I have met you, I have been impressed how much you support poetry. You are one that will show up at in an event when nobody else does. I witnessed this and have heard from others that being the case. You don't just physically show up. You've been a main administrator for Bird's Nest Reading Series and Open Mic for a number of years, plus the Black Coffee Poets. Can you explain both these opportunities for poets?
Well, Barbaric Yop came to an end, and a number of us folks started meeting, and there were other people in other areas of the state that were meeting to figure out how to replace Barbaric Yop. Our group ended up convening at Black Coffee and Waffle House on Cretin at Marshall Avenue. And we were fortunate to have Mike Finley, who was a person admired by all of us there. And all of us had relationships with him that had pluses and minuses, because Mike was very human, but he was also somebody that we all admired. And he would come, and John Wenstrom would come, and George and Greg Rude, and we would have coffee, and we would probably shoot the breeze, quite a bit of the time, but we also would take turns reading poems. And I don't know if we were critiquing each other, but we were being supportive of each other. And we started to talk about, well, what do we want to do about Barbaric Yop? And Greg, ended up coming up with the name Bird's Nest, and I didn't have an issue with it, so I just kind of kept it. And for myself, is why not use it as a working title for it? And I think George was the person who said, let's add to the open mic venue. Let's have a guest artist. George, you can nod your head. You don't have to unmute. But George is the one that said, let's do a guest artist. So Bird's Nest Open Mic meets the final Sunday every month. There are exceptions to that as a rule. And we have a guest artist who has about 20 minutes to promote his work or her work. And that's as it should be. And then we have about an hour then of time for open mic, and they're 5-minute spots. They can be reserved in advance, which is ideal in terms of, structure. But people sometimes show up and we have time to have more readers so they can then have a turn. We have a person on our screen. If you can see Jane Burns, there's a young Melanie here. Melanie waves so people know who I'm talking about. Melanie read at the Bird's Nest this past Sunday, and she was being honored by her classroom for having written a Veterans Day poem. So that was kind of special to have her grandmother help shepherd her onto our program. The Black Coffee Poets has been a lot of fun because the tradition of meeting at Black Coffee at a table and joining tables together and kind of impromptu, we ended up having some meetings where we had 20 people, and we had started out with 5 or 6, and we've had later meetings where there might be only 3 of us. That kind of thing is kind of uneven, but it's definitely Black Coffee. I mean, you're just sitting there drinking coffee and you're visiting and talking about programs and promotions and people that are getting a book published, and again, sharing of poetry.
And doing more than just reading poetry at an open mic, you're getting to know each other a little.
Yeah, it's more community than not. Last summer we tweaked it. We did poetry in the park.
Yeah, that was that. I went to a couple of those. That was good.
It was a huge boost for me. I mean, to get outside and have more people show up in person, I've been encouraged time and again, stop with the Zoom program and go to live open mic. But we had gained some people across wide, great distances. And we thought, we're not going to drop the Zoom program. But then I thought, well, let's expand Black Coffee Poets. And last summer, it went so well, I started thinking about, can I carry an open mic program? I was hoping it would be in St. Paul. George and I talked about keeping it centered on close to where Barbaric Yop and Bird's Nest in effect are centered. And that's what we would do, of course. And that's what we did with Poetry in the Park, which was essentially Black Coffee Poets. I think the title Black Coffee Poets suggests a writing group. I think writing groups are profoundly important. People do move on from them. Sometimes when people get published and maybe they get a little bit of notice, they sometimes are ready to move with other well-known poets. So sometimes writing groups are a way to foster somebody's exit from the group, which is fine. I do know that the narrative poets have a really a better chance with audience because their stake is in storytelling, and that's an important facet of what we do. But the images poetry, typically it's hard for audiences to appreciate anything somewhat involved or detailed beyond just essential imagery.
I think though, if somebody's really good at writing, people can sit there and have this with their eyes, and they see it while they hear it, But I got one last question before we do our giveaway, and because we're going to take it off the poetry a little bit. And the question is, what does being a grandfather mean to you?
Grandfathers, and I think grandmothers too. I don't think it's just about grandfathers. They have the capacity to be present with a child. Parents, I'm looking at Sarah here. I'm thinking, if you are so busy just holding the fort down and holding the, making sure the locker is full and making sure the laundry is cleaned, and if you have an employer, satisfying the employer's needs, whatever, it's like, how do you stay present in a conversation with a child? Well, a grandparent, if they're so blessed, they can actually hear what the child is saying. I think, it's one of those gifts, if you live so long, one of the big wins is you get to be a grandparent, and you're not the responsible parent. You may have to be as a default, but it's not an ideal situation. If you're a grandparent and you're the primary parent, it may be something nature provided, for the care of the child. But the reality is a resentful parent is never going to be helpful. And whether it's the birth parent or a foster parent or a grandparent, if there's any kind of resentment around children, it's usually off. But I'm a fortunate grandfather in the sense that the kids are with me and they know they're going to have fun, and I expect them to be children. And if they're not kind to each other, they expect them, to check it. So I have to say, I've had more fun. My 4 granddaughters live here in the cities, and their mother ended up, single and working, and I could spell her. So I had a lot of adventures with them. And it was just, it's been wonderful. I love it. And I got to see my grandsons out in Oregon first week of February.
Cool.
And same thing. We had a great time.
Yeah. You get to enjoy all the aspects and then send them home.
Yes.
But so we have to reach out to Sarah. Sarah, do we have any winners?
I'm checking for the last entries here. So I believe Stephen with the V or with the PH. Yes, 33. I believe that's one of our winners. So congratulations, Stephen. River picked 35, and I'm looking for Rick's winner. I believe that Annette guessed 12 and Rick had 17. So without going over, Annette. So I think we need you to put your address in a private message in the chat directly to River.
No,
to me.
To
Rick.
Yeah.
Okay. Rick needs your address in order to deliver the book to you by mail.
If it's in chat, is it available after the program?
We can save the chat.
Last time it didn't work.
I'll copy and paste it to you in an email to you if you'd like, Rick.
Would you do that? Because I want to make sure they get the book. That's what
then send them to Sarah, everybody.
If you send it to me, I'll copy and paste and email it to Rick tonight.
Thanks.
So that we can make sure that your book gets to you. So Annette and Stephen.
I'm sending it to Rick or to Richard?
To me, Sarah.
I'm sending my address
to me, Sarah.
To Sarah?
Yep. And then I will copy and paste it in an email to Rick and he'll mail you the book. So.
And I do have one more question, Rick.
Yep.
Actually. What is your motivation and truth for supporting poetry as you do? I mean, there's nobody, you have showed up at places and surprised me. I mean, I did an open mic here in Little River Falls and you showed up and supported me, and I've heard of you showing up at being the only person that shows up sometimes. And
it sounds like Julie. Julie.
Yeah, that's from Julie. Yes, that is from Julie.
Well, Jane Burns was there too, so I know I wasn't the only one, but things like that have happened. No.
So what's your motivation and truth for being so supporting poetry so strongly?
I would say that the artistic outlet in poetry is an essential, the Latin phrase, without which nothing, sine qua non. We need to have beauty celebrated, and poets celebrate beauty. They celebrate beauty in people, they celebrate beauty in nature, they celebrate beauty in culture, they even celebrate beauty in religion. God help them. I think the notion that we are inspired to write, that somehow the spirit moves through us to create the imagery, to write the words, to craft the verses, to perform them with some kind of passion for the words. You feel like you're being put to useful service. You're part of something larger than yourself. For me, poetry is very spiritual. And I find in poetry a celebration of life. So for me, poetry is very profound. The word entertainment doesn't quite capture it for me. If it were just about entertaining people, I'd be a comedian. But if you think about the dramatist poet, what they're stirring in the audience member is the same thing that the poet is trying to stir in the reader. And if you're actually interested in stirring up the spirit within people, that they feel something deeply or something profoundly, that's a real gift. If you have the gift, music is a fabulous gift, and I'm not a musician, but I am a poet, and it cares for me, and I care for it, and I have passion for it, and it's a blessing to have a passion like that.
Thank you, Rick.
You bet.
Thank you very much. This has been an awesome interview. It's too bad we didn't get to hear much of your poetry. You probably still had your 5-minute little reading that we missed, but and the next up close interview will be May 3rd. It'll be, I still haven't figured out who that person is yet. So, and with that, I don't know. Does anybody out there, or do you have anything you'd like to say, Rick?
Well, I would just like to say hello to all the folks that I've not met yet. I know some of these names, and wanted to say thank you to the people who maybe showed up because I prompted them to show up. My friend Beverly was with us. I think she's still with me. I can't see everybody on the screen, maybe. There you are, Beverly. I'm waving at you. I have friends long-term like Lauren Nemi. I think Lauren and I spent quite a few times over at the Troubadour wine bar. And it has a front window. It's like a dress shop front window, but it becomes the stage. And I absolutely love the Troubadour, but we lost it when there was a change in ownership or management. We lost the Troubadour, and it was such a fabulous place because people would come in off the street, and if the poetry was going well, like Hardy, if you were at the Troubadour ever, you know what I'm talking about. If you were telling a story and there was somebody in the restaurant in the wine bar, and they heard you telling a story, they would stop doing what they're doing and start listening to you tell your stories.
I was never there.
Oh man, to have that kind of a venue.
So
It was a little place, but I remember it. I was there, featured there, and it was pretty cool. The window whole setup.
Well, I named that stage. I named it the mannequin stage because to me it was a dress shop window. Designed to have mannequins in it. To sell dresses. Because it's clear as that's what that place was before it was ever a wine bar. It was a dress shop.
Wow.
But venues come and go. I mean, that happened with the Underground Music Cafe.
Yeah.
The Egg Roll Queen, and we want for really good venues for sound.
Yeah.
Well, there's a place in Duluth. If anybody, we could ever do a reading. It's an old church. They get all the like big musicians and go there. I can't remember the name of it, but man, it's just beautiful. The acoustics in there are incredible.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
Where was the Troubadour?
On Hennepin Avenue,
Okay.
right across from where the public library, I think, used to be, maybe down a block.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
It's very close.
It's, what is it now? Is it still a
It's,
bar?
I think it's still there, but it's
still a
the
wine
music.
bar, but
Yeah.
doesn't do live entertainment.
Oh, so nobody's using its great picture window.
Right. Yeah. Anybody wealthy out there that wants to buy it, I'll manage it for you. Maybe when Lauren sells his next book, he'll buy the venue.
Hurry
Here's
up,
what I sell.
We're waiting.
Yeah.
Well, cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, everybody, for coming.
Okay.
Thank you, Rick.
Thank you, everybody, for
Thank
showing
you, Sarah, for helping out.
Yeah.
there. Thank you, everybody.
And Jane, thank your handler.
What?
Thank you, River, and thank you, Richard.
Thank your handler there, Jane, please. Oh, there you
Hi, Melanie.
She's right here already.
go.
Thank you. We'll talk soon.
Lily.
Thank you,
Bye-bye, everybody.
everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Very nice.
Look out of here. The meeting.
Need to go.
Thank you, Rick, and thank you, River. That was really lovely.
Yes, thank you, darling. You did
Yeah,
very well.
thank you. Good. I'm glad we practiced. I
Cool.
chat and I will send it to you and Rick.
Okay. Oh, you don't have to send it to me.
No.
It's all about him. Yeah.
I'll send it to him so he has it.
Cool. I'm gonna go get the thing off.
I think we're still recording.
Yeah, we are, because I have to go on to the other room.
Okay. You,
I
we
got-
can you want me to mute you? Mute your video so you.
Oh, no, it's okay. I'll edit the video.
Oh, you
'Cause
will.
I had
Oh,
it
you can
recording
do it.
before, because then I have,
Yes,
because it's in the other room, so I can't be two places.
of course. Well, good night.
Well, love you, dear. Thank you so much.
You too. It was wonderful. Okay. See you soon.
Okay.
you.
Soon. Bye.
Soon. Yeah, soon.
You can see this transcript. I have something on here. Hi, you're new, huh? Hope you're on mute. Okay, I'm gonna go get Nico. You gotta move. Nico, you gotta move. Gotta move. Come on, gotta move. Up. Good boy. Woo.